Look at this room. 300 of the most powerful people in the city, all staring up at my husband. He's up there working the crowd with that easy charm that fooled absolutely everyone.
He's the man of the hour tonight.
Say in a natural American voice, the self-made billionaire visionary who built a massive tech empire out of nothing but dirt and sweat. At least, that's the story he's selling them. I'm standing just a few feet away in the wings. I've got a second microphone right here in my hands, and I'm shaking. But trust me, it's definitely not from nerves. It's this crazy, electric thrill. Because I know something none of these people do. In exactly 3 minutes, I'm gonna walk out there and completely destroy his entire life. To get how we ended up here, we gotta go back 12 years.
Back to who we were before the money.
We met in this cramped, freezing little coffee shop near campus. I was always tucked away in the corner, just quietly reading. I wore these faded, oversized sweaters and beat-up canvas sneakers. I looked exactly like your average, broke college student. Say in a natural American voice, introducing a memory. Julian was the barista working the espresso machine. He was fiercely ambitious, ridiculously handsome, and totally broke. He used to slide me free pastries right around closing time. In exchange, I'd sit there and listen to him talk for hours about his dreams. He didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to be legendary.
He had this desperate hunger to prove himself to everyone.
He grew up with absolutely nothing. His mom constantly reminded him of how poor they were, and he carried that chip on his shoulder like a badge of honor. Honestly, I loved his passion. But I was keeping a massive secret from him during those late-night talks. I wasn't the struggling student I pretended to be. I was actually the sole heir to a multi-generational fortune. My grandfather built a massive real estate empire from the ground up. But he hated flashy wealth with a passion. He always told me money should be a silent shield, never a loud weapon. He warned me that massive wealth changes how people look at you. It changes how they treat you. And worse, how they love you. I promised him I'd keep my inheritance a total secret until I found someone who loved me for me. So when Julian and I moved into this tiny, beat-up one-bedroom apartment, I didn't complain once. The roof leaked and the radiator clanked all night long. But we were together, and honestly, that was enough for me. I took a modest job at a local library just to pay the bills. Meanwhile, Julian was pouring his absolute soul into his first startup. He was building this brilliant software platform for clean energy supply chains. His idea was genius, but pulling it off took serious capital. Money that Julian just didn't have. For 2 whole years, I had to watch the man I loved slowly break under constant rejection. He pitched to dozens of banks and venture capitalists. Every single one of them shut the door in his face. They told him he lacked experience, that he was just some kid with a pipe dream. I'll never forget the night he finally hit rock bottom. It was a freezing Tuesday in November. He walked in, dropped his briefcase, and just collapsed onto our cheap thrift store sofa. He put his face in his hands and just sobbed.
It was this deep, gut-wrenching sound of pure defeat.
He told me he was giving up, that he was a total failure. He said he was going to dissolve the company the next morning and just get some low-level corporate job. My heart completely shattered for him. I couldn't let his brilliant light burn out over something as stupid as money. That night, while he was passed out from exhaustion, I sat at our tiny kitchen table. I opened my laptop and made a choice that would change our lives forever. I reached out to the legal team managing my grandfather's trust. I told my grandfather's lawyers to set up a ghost company.
We called it Vanguard Horizon.
By the next morning, My lawyers reached out to Julian's startup with a crazy offer. $2 million in seed money for a 60% stake. When Julian first saw the email, he thought someone was messing with him. He just stared at his cracked phone screen, totally terrified to believe it. But a week later, the money actually cleared into his business account. The second he saw that bank balance, he completely lost his mind.
He literally dropped to his knees in our tiny living room and kissed the floor.
Then he grabbed me, spinning me around, yelling that we finally made it. He looked up at the ceiling, crying, thanking these mysterious angel investors for believing in his genius. He had absolutely no clue that his secret savior was standing right in front of him. I was just standing there in a stained apron, crying right along with him. Over the next 5 years, the company just exploded. Julian's tech, backed by my secret millions, completely flipped the logistics industry upside down. That initial $2 million turned into 20, then 50, then hundreds of millions of dollars. We ditched that leaky apartment for good and moved into this massive glass penthouse downtown. It was packed with flashy modern art and ridiculous designer furniture. Honestly, I was so happy back then, thinking I'd given the man I loved everything he needed. I was totally fine staying in the background. I played the quiet, supportive wife, while Julian soaked up all the spotlight. I didn't need the credit, you know? Seeing him win was enough for me. But as the bank accounts got bigger, Julian started to change. It wasn't overnight, just this slow, creepy buildup of pure arrogance. That hustle he used to have. It got replaced by this massive, suffocating ego. He started buying fleets of imported sports cars he barely even drove. He was wearing custom suits that cost more than our first apartment. The money didn't bother me, but the way he was acting really did. But the worst part was how he started rewriting our history. In all these magazine interviews, he'd talk about pulling himself up by his bootstraps. He'd look right into the camera and swear nobody ever gave him a single dime. I'd sit on the couch watching these interviews, feeling this strange knot tighten in my stomach. I kept telling myself it was just marketing. A CEO needs a strong origin story, right? So I pushed down the discomfort and just smiled when he came home. But then that arrogance started bleeding into our marriage. He began treating me less like a partner and way more like an accessory. At dinner parties, if the conversation turned to finance, he'd literally put his hand over mine and give this patronizing little chuckle. He'd tell our guests not to bore me with heavy topics, claiming I only cared about charity galas. He was literally mansplaining business to the woman who secretly owned his entire empire. I'd just sit there, sipping my wine, feeling this cold, quiet rage building in my chest. I kept my mouth shut to protect his pride, but things got so much worse when my mother-in-law, Sylvia, showed up. The second Julian became a billionaire, she suddenly wanted to be in his life. Desperate for her approval, he bought her a luxury condo and handed her an unlimited black card. Sylvia immediately crowned herself the queen mother of our lives. She was this deeply bitter, classist woman who seemed to resent my very existence. Because I still preferred simple clothes and quiet nights, she constantly mocked me, looking down her nose at everything I did. I remember this one afternoon. We were sitting out on the terrace of the penthouse. Sylvia was drinking champagne, just looking me up and down with absolute disgust. She couldn't stand that I wasn't the flashy society wife she thought her son deserved. She told me I was incredibly lucky and that most men of Julian's stature would have traded me in by now. She said I brought absolutely nothing to the table. No wealth, no connections, no ambition. She actually told me I should be on my knees thanking God for her son's charitable heart. I just looked at this woman, wearing a massive diamond necklace that my trust fund had technically paid for.
She was sitting on a terrace that my money secured, insulting me right to my face. The irony was honestly almost too perfect to be real.
I didn't yell or try to defend myself.
I simply smiled, took a slow sip of my tea, and agreed with her.
I told her Julian and I had a very unique financial arrangement, and that I was grateful every single day for how things turned out.
Sylvia just rolled her eyes and took another sip of her champagne.
She completely missed the irony of what I said.
She had absolutely no idea that the quiet woman she was mocking held the power to take away everything she was enjoying.
But the real breaking point didn't have anything to do with Sylvia.
It was all about Marcus. He was Julian's original business partner and the brilliant engineer who actually wrote the code for the platform.
While Julian was out playing the charismatic CEO for the cameras, Marcus was the quiet genius keeping the whole engine running. I always liked Marcus. He was kind, genuine, and deeply loyal to what they had built. But as Julian's ego blew up, he started seeing Marcus as a liability. Say in a natural American voice, explaining with a hint of disbelief. Marcus wasn't polished enough for the magazine covers, and he actually pushed back on Julian's reckless spending. So Julian decided his oldest friend was just dead weight. One Tuesday morning, out of nowhere, Julian staged a ruthless corporate coup. He used a legal loophole to force Marcus out of the company completely. He offered him a joke of a severance package and threatened to bury him in lawsuits if he fought it.
When Julian came home that night, he poured himself a glass of expensive scotch and actually laughed about it.
He called Marcus a loser who just couldn't run with the big dogs. I sat there listening to him, and I felt this freezing chill run down my spine. I looked at my husband, and I realized I didn't recognize him at all. He had turned into a monster, totally drunk on his own myth. And if he could so casually destroy the guy who built his entire company, I knew with terrifying certainty it was only a matter of time before he came for me. My suspicions were confirmed just 3 weeks later. Julian had left for a week-long business trip to Dubai, but he accidentally left his personal laptop synced to our home network. I wasn't snooping, but a notification popped up on the shared calendar that caught my eye. It was an appointment with a high-profile divorce attorney known for aggressive asset protection.
My heart completely stopped.
I sat down at his desk, my hands literally shaking. I clicked the link, and it took me straight to an open email thread. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the screen hitting my face. And I read through months of emails detailing exactly how he planned to blindside me.
I read the exact words he typed to his lawyer.
He called me clueless?
He said I was financially illiterate. He bragged that he built his entire empire with his own 2 hands.
I didn't cry, and I didn't scream. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the screen. I slowly closed the laptop. Any lingering sadness I felt over my marriage instantly evaporated. It was replaced by this terrifyingly calm clarity.
Julian wanted to play a ruthless game of corporate warfare.
But he made one fatal miscalculation. Absolute power. He picked a fight with the bank. The next morning, I dropped the helpless wife act. I put on my old trench coat, tied my hair back, and left the penthouse. I took a cab through a heavy downpour to a dreary part of the city. It was time to make my move. I showed up at this small, dark wood diner on the edge of town. It's the kind of place you go when you don't want to be seen. I slid into a corner booth by the window and ordered a black coffee. I just sat there in the dim light, waiting. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked in. He looked absolutely terrible. He had these deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were a mess. He had the heavy, slumped posture of a guy who'd just lost everything. He slid into the booth across from me, looking totally confused. He asked why I wanted to meet, figuring Julian sent me to push that insulting severance deal. He told me to save my breath. He said he was already ruined, and that Julian had won. I didn't say a single word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I placed it on the sticky table and slid it across to him. It was the physical proof of everything Julian didn't know. Marcus stared at the folder like it was a trap. He looked up at me with these tired eyes, asking what it was. I kept my voice perfectly steady. I just looked at him and told him to open it. He hesitated for a second before flipping it open. Say in a natural American voice, revealing the secret. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Vanguard Horizon. Right beneath them were the bank transfer records for the initial $2 million seed funding, stamped with an official corporate seal. Marcus read the first page. Then he read the second page, right where my signature sat on the authorization line. His eyes went wide, and his breath literally caught in his throat. He looked up at me, completely pale with shock, and just whispered my name. He could barely get the words out. His voice was shaking when he asked if it was really me. If I was the one who funded them. He said Julian always bragged that Vanguard was some elite group of European bankers. I looked right at him and kept my voice perfectly steady. I told him Julian didn't know. He never knew. I funded this startup because I actually believed in him back then. And I believed in you, Marcus. But the man I married was long gone. I laid it all out for him. Julian was secretly hiding our assets and planning to blindside me with a divorce. And worse, he had just stolen Marcus's entire life's work. Then I broke down the math. I owned 60% of the holding company through my trust. Marcus still legally owned his 10%, even if he was off the board. Together, we held a 70% supermajority. We had the power to do whatever we wanted. Marcus just stared at me. You could see the realization washing over him like a tidal wave. The crushing despair in his eyes started to fade. It was replaced by this dangerous, brilliant spark. He leaned in and asked what I wanted to do. I leaned closer across that sticky table. I told him I didn't just want to take my money and walk away. If I just divorced him quietly, Julian would spin the whole narrative. He'd tell the world I was just some gold digger who found a legal loophole. His entire currency was his public image. That massive ego was his most prized asset. To truly stop him, we had to destroy the myth of the self-made man. We had to do it publicly, and we had to take the company back. A slow, sharp smile spread across Marcus's face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile in months. He knew exactly what I was getting at. He looked right at me and just said, "The Pioneers of Tomorrow Gala." I nodded, say in a natural American voice, calculating and precise. The gala was a massive charity event, exactly 1 month away. Julian was the guest of honor. He was getting some huge award and had been bragging about it for weeks. He invited every major media outlet to watch his crowning moment. It was the perfect track. He wanted the world's attention, so we were going to give it to him. I looked at Marcus and agreed. We let him have his stage. And then we burn it to the ground. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. At home, I played the sweet, oblivious wife. I smiled while Julian bragged about his genius. I even helped him pick out his custom tuxedo. I let him patronize me. I let his mother make snide comments about my ambition. I swallowed my pride and played my part perfectly. I made sure Julian suspected absolutely nothing. But behind the scenes, I was a ghost moving through the financial underworld. I introduced Marcus to Vivian, the ruthless head of my legal team.
We met in secret, working late into the night.
We didn't just plan a divorce. Dangerous and powerful, we planned a hostile corporate takeover. We quietly restructured the Vanguard Trust to remove any anonymity. I was preparing to expose my name as the sole investor. We invoked a dormant clause in the funding contract. A clause Julian had arrogantly ignored. It allowed Vanguard Horizon to call in all outstanding loans. We just had to prove he acted in bad faith, say in an irrefutable evidence of Julian's offshore embezzlement. Step by step, we built an airtight cage around him, and he didn't feel a single bar being lowered into place. The tension in our penthouse grew suffocating as the gala approached. Julian's arrogance reached a fever pitch. He was completely unbearable. He yelled at his assistants and treated everyone like peasants. I watched him pace around the living room, intoxicated by his own myth. He was so blinded by his impending award, he couldn't see the trap I had laid right under his feet. Say in a natural American voice, calm and narrative. The day before the gala, I caught him standing in front of the mirror. He was adjusting his cuffs and practicing his acceptance speech. He struck a pose of absolute dominance. He claimed he built his empire with his own two hands, relying on nothing but his own vision. I stood in the doorway, watching him. I complimented his speech, hiding the ice in my eyes. The night of the gala finally rolled around. We pulled up to this spectacular historical museum that they'd completely decked out in silver and white orchids. The paparazzi were absolutely swarming us the second we stepped out of the car. Julian just ate it up, waving to the crowd like he was royalty. Right behind us was his mother, Sylvia. She was wearing this ridiculous silk gown and dripping in heavy diamond jewelry. She looked so incredibly smug posing for all those flashing cameras. She had no idea she was parading around in luxury that my trust fund paid for. They escorted us inside and sat us right at the head table, front and center. The room was absolutely packed with the most powerful people in the state. For about 2 hours, it was just a blur of expensive food, flowing champagne, and endless networking. The whole vibe in that ballroom was just suffocating elite wealth. Everywhere you looked, billionaires were clinking glasses, totally clueless about the storm that was brewing. I just sat there quietly, sipping my water. I could feel the weight of what I was about to do hanging over the whole room. Finally, the chandeliers dimmed down and a hush fell over the crowd. The master of ceremonies walked up to the stage to kick things off. He launched into this glowing, totally over-the-top introduction about my husband's visionary genius. It was honestly hard to listen to with a straight face. When they finally called his name, Julian stood up with this perfectly practiced look of fake humility. He took his time buttoning his custom jacket, making sure every single eye in the room was on him. He gave my shoulder this quick, patronizing little pat before he turned away. He walked toward the stage, and the entire room just erupted into a massive standing ovation. All these people were cheering for the guy they thought conquered the tech world all by himself. He was just soaking it in, his chest puffed out with pure, blinding arrogance. He got up to the podium and grabbed the microphone. He looked out at this massive sea of wealthy faces staring back at him with total admiration. The clapping finally died down, and he got ready to deliver that speech he'd been practicing in the mirror. Before he even said a word, he let out this soft little chuckle and smiled. It was the exact smile of a guy who genuinely believed he'd outsmarted the entire world. He felt completely untouchable up there. He thought he was standing at the absolute peak of his empire. For the next 10 minutes, he just fed them his masterpiece of a lie. He talked about growing up broke, our leaky old apartment, and all the doors that got slammed in his face. His voice echoed through the room as he bragged about having no safety net, claiming he built it all with his own 2 hands. The crowd went absolutely wild. They bought every single word of his little fairy tale. He just stood there, bowing his head like some humble hero. It was honestly sickening to watch. I didn't clap. I just stood up from my seat and started walking toward the stage. The clapping started to fade out as people noticed me. You could feel the confusion rippling through the room. For a split second, Julian looked totally lost. But then that fake PR smile snapped right back onto his face. He actually thought I was coming up there to give him a hug for the cameras? I walked right up to the podium and stopped dead in front of him. I didn't smile, and I definitely didn't hug him. I just reached out and grabbed the mic right out of his hand. He gripped it tight for a second, his eyes flashing this dark, silent warning. He was daring me to pull it away. But he couldn't risk a scene in front of all those cameras. So he let it go. I turned my back on him and faced the crowd. The whole room went dead silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. I brought the mic to my lips and took a breath. I told them my husband had just given a truly moving speech. I said his story about building an empire from dirt was incredibly inspiring. And then I told them it was a complete and utter lie. A massive gasp swept through the entire ballroom. Say in a natural American voice, sharp detail. I even heard a wine glass shatter somewhere in the back. Say in a natural American voice, cold observation. Julian's face went completely white. All that arrogant color just drained right out of him. He stepped toward me, whispering frantically for me to get off the stage. His perfect little mask was finally cracking. I completely ignored him and looked dead into the live broadcast camera. I told the world his first company was hours away from bankruptcy. I told them a mysterious firm called Vanguard Horizon bailed him out with $2 million. Julian just froze in absolute terror. He thought that name was his little secret. I didn't even let him catch his breath. I told the crowd how he spent years thinking Vanguard Horizon was just some faceless group of European bankers. He honestly thought he could outsmart them. I reminded everyone about the brilliant engineer who actually wrote the code. The guy Julian ruthlessly pushed out when he decided he was dead weight. Then I turned to the stage and invited Marcus to step into the light. The whole room started murmuring as Marcus walked out from the shadows. He wasn't the broken, defeated guy Julian had fired. He was wearing a sharp suit, standing tall, and looking more confident than I'd ever seen him. Marcus walked right past Julian like he didn't even exist. He came straight up to the podium. Say in a natural American voice, he handed me a small remote control. The trap was set, and it was time to spring it. I held up the remote and pressed the button. My voice boomed over the speakers. I told them Vanguard Horizon wasn't a group of bankers. It was a blind trust created by my grandfather, and I was the one pulling the strings. The massive screens behind us suddenly flickered. Julian's sleek corporate logo completely vanished. In its place, the original Vanguard Horizon funding contracts popped up in huge letters. The absolute proof of his lie was towering over the entire room. The camera zoomed right in on the projection. At the bottom of the document, next to the $2 million transfer line, was the final nail in the coffin. It was my signature. There was no spinning this. The ballroom instantly erupted into total chaos. Reporters started shouting questions over each other. Camera flashes were going off like crazy, blinding the stage. The whole room was in absolute shock. I turned and looked right at Julian. He looked like he'd just been hit by a freight train. His mouth was hanging open, but he couldn't even speak. His brain was completely short-circuiting. I didn't let the noise drown me out.
I leaned into the mic, and my voice cut right through the chaos.
I told him I was the safety net. Say, in a natural American voice, I owned 60%, and with Marcus, we had a supermajority. I didn't even give him a second to catch his breath. I turned right back to the crowd and dropped the hammer. I told them the board just voted to terminate him as CEO, effective immediately. I laid it all out, citing his massive financial misconduct and offshore embezzlement. Right on cue, the massive screens behind us flipped again. This time, we put his hidden Cayman Island bank records on full blast for everyone to see. We even threw up the emails he sent his divorce lawyer, proving he was trying to defraud me and the company. The proof was literally 50 feet tall, right behind his head. The whole room just lost its mind. People were shouting, gasping, completely dropping that polite high society act. You could see the big-shot investors panicking, yanking out their phones to call their brokers. They were trying to dump their stock before the market even opened. I took a quick look down at the front table, right at my mother-in-law, Sylvia. She was clutching her chest, her face turning purple from pure rage and humiliation. It finally hit her that the woman she called cheap actually owned the diamond necklace around her throat. She looked like she was going to pass out right there into her champagne. Julian finally found his voice, but that smooth CEO charm was totally gone. He just snapped, screaming at the top of his lungs that I was lying. He looked completely unhinged, pointing this shaking finger at me and yelling that it was a setup. He was still trying to claim he built it all himself, like a madman going down with his ship. But nobody was buying his act anymore. The reporters totally ignored his screaming and just rushed the stage to get pictures of the screens. The whole myth of the self-made billionaire was officially dead. It was bleeding out right there on the stage of his own charity gala, and the cameras were catching every single second of it. I didn't even bother arguing with his delusions. I just stepped away from the podium and walked right up to him. As I got closer, you could see him physically shrink back. All that fake bravado was just gone. I stood right in his face, looking him dead in the eyes with total, terrifying calm. I lowered the mic so the crowd couldn't hear us. I wanted this last part to be just for him. I leaned in close and told him he didn't build a damn thing. I whispered that he'd just been driving the car I bought him this whole time. And now, I was taking the keys back. I didn't wait around for him to say anything back. I just turned my back on him, leaving him standing there completely broken. I held out the microphone and handed it right over to Marcus. It was my way of passing the torch back to the guy who actually deserved it. My part in this war was finally done. Without another word, I walked off that stage and headed down the steps. I walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, keeping my head held high. The crowd literally parted for me, and the camera flashes lit up my path like a runway. I didn't look back once as I walked right out the doors and into the night. The fallout from the gala was absolutely biblical. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the entire landscape of our lives had been scorched to the earth. There was no putting the genie back in the bottle. The footage of my microphone drop was everywhere. It was playing on every major news network, trending on every social media platform, and being dissected by every financial analyst in the country. The world watched his ego shatter on a loop. Overnight, Julian went from being the golden boy of the tech industry to the ultimate laughingstock of the financial world. Say, in a natural American voice, the punchline of his whole life had been taken over. He couldn't show his face anywhere. The corporate response was swift and merciless. Say, in a natural American voice, steady and factual. By noon that very same day, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. They officially ratified his termination, stripping him of his title, his access, and his power.
But the corporate execution was only the beginning.
Because I had caught him attempting to hide marital assets, my lawyer, Vivian, absolutely decimated him in the divorce proceedings.
She was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and she didn't leave a single scrap behind. The post-nuptial agreement he had tried to trap me with was completely useless.
The judge took one look at the evidence of his brazen fraud and threw the document out of court.
Julian's aggressive asset protection plan had completely backfired. When the dust finally settled, Julian was left with absolutely nothing. The empire he claimed to have built with his own two hands was legally and rightfully taken from him.
He was stripped down to the reality he had spent his whole life trying to escape.
He lost the company. He lost the sprawling glass penthouse. He lost the fleets of imported sports cars he barely even drove. Say in a natural American voice, every single status symbol he had used to inflate his ego was repossessed or transferred out of his name.
His reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that no legitimate tech firm would even take his phone calls.
He was a pariah.
The same people who had applauded him at the gala now pretended they had never even met him.
Say in a natural American voice, calm and descriptive, with no money and nowhere else to go, he was forced to move out of the city. He ended up in a small, cramped rented apartment with his mother, Sylvia.
She had been forced to return every piece of jewelry and luxury clothing my trust had paid for.
Word travels fast.
I heard Julian and Sylvia spend their days in that tiny apartment, just pointing fingers.
They blame everyone by themselves. They still can't admit their own greed built the trap. Julian spent his whole life running from where he started. He was terrified of being poor. But his massive ego dragged him right back to the bottom. Now he's just a broken guy staring out a dirty window.
As for me, I didn't want to run a tech company. That was never my dream. I took the keys back to protect my investment.
But I wasn't going to spend my life sitting in corporate boardrooms.
The company needed a real leader.
Someone who actually understood the code and cared about the team.
So I made it official. I appointed Marcus as the new CEO. Marcus stepped up with this quiet, brilliant confidence. He didn't need the flashy magazine covers or the ego trips. He just rolled up his sleeves and got to work fixing Julian's mess.
His first move was a total rebrand.
He tore down those arrogant silver logos Julian had plastered everywhere. He replaced it all with something that actually stood for teamwork and real innovation. Then, Marcus did something that really showed who he is. He tracked down the original engineering team. The exact same people Julian had ruthlessly fired. Marcus brought every single one of them back. The toxic, cutthroat vibe disappeared almost overnight. Say in a natural workplace that was actually fair. Ideas mattered more than egos. And the people doing the heavy lifting finally got the credit they deserved. The market loved the authenticity. Without Julian blowing cash on PR stunts, the company thrived. They focused on the actual tech again. Within a year, the stock completely doubled in value. With the company in safe hands, I could finally breathe. I kept the glass penthouse in the divorce. But walking through it felt like touring a museum dedicated to Julian's ego. It was cold, sterile, and completely fake. It was time to tear it all down. Say in a natural American voice, quiet and reflective. 3 weeks later, my worst suspicions were confirmed. So in a natural American voice, calm and observant, Julian had left for a week-long business trip to Dubai. He kissed my cheek at the door, playing the perfect husband. But he was about to make a massive, careless mistake. In his rush to the airport, he left his personal laptop behind. And more importantly, it was still synced to our home network. I walked into his office just to tidy up. I wasn't even looking for anything specific. But then,
a notification popped up on the shared calendar.
It was a confirmed appointment with a high-profile divorce attorney,
A guy known for aggressive asset protection. My heart completely stopped. I clicked the link, and it led me straight into an open email thread. I sat in the dark of his home office for hours. The blue light of the screen was the only thing illuminating my face. I read through months of hidden correspondence. He was planning to blindside me with a post-nuptial agreement. He was going to disguise it as corporate restructuring. And if I refused to sign, he'd file for divorce.
but it was worse than that.
He was secretly funneling millions into offshore shell companies. He wanted to make sure I'd be left with pennies. In one email to his lawyer, he really laid it all out. He wrote that I was clueless about the corporate structure. He called me a sweet girl who was financially illiterate. He said he built the empire with his own two hands. He refused to let a woman who contributed nothing take his legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the words on the screen. He told the lie so many times, he actually believed it. He completely forgot about Vanguard Horizon, the anonymous investors who saved him from bankruptcy. He thought they were just a faceless entity he could outsmart. I closed the laptop, and all my sadness just evaporated.
It was replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity.
Julian wanted to play corporate warfare, but he made one fatal miscalculation. He picked a fight with the bank. The next morning, I put on my trench coat and took a cab. I headed to a dark wood diner on the outskirts of the city. It was pouring rain outside. I sat in a corner booth with a thick folder and waited. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked in. He sat down across from me, looking completely defeated. He said if Julian sent me to push that insulting severance agreement, I was wasting my breath. He was already ruined. And Julian had won. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I slid it across the sticky diner table right in front of him. Marcus looked at it suspiciously. I told him to open it. Say in a natural American voice, inside were the original incorporation documents for Vanguard Horizon, along with the bank transfer records of the initial seed funding. It proved I was the sole proprietor. Marcus read the first page, then the second. His eyes went wide, and his breath caught in his throat. He looked up at me, his face completely pale with shock. He whispered, asking if I was Vanguard Horizon. Julian had told him Vanguard was a group of European investors. I kept my voice steady and said, Julian didn't know. I explained my husband was secretly planning to divorce me and hide our assets. I reminded Marcus that I owned 60% of the company, and he still owned 10%. Combined, we held a 70% supermajority. Together, we had the power to do whatever we wanted. Marcus stared at me as the realization washed over him. The heavy despair in his eyes was slowly replaced by a dangerous, brilliant spark. He leaned in and asked me exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't just want my money back. If I just divorced him, Julian would spin the narrative. His ego was his most prized asset. See, in a ruthless and final, to truly stop him, we had to destroy the myth of the self-made man. We had to do it publicly and take the company back. Dark amusement, a slow, sharp smile spread across Marcus's face. Say, in a natural realization, he immediately suggested the Pioneers of Tomorrow Gala. It was a massive charity event scheduled for exactly 1 month away. Julian was the guest of honor, and he wanted it to be his crowning moment. I nodded in agreement. I told Marcus we would let him have his grand stage. And then we were going to burn it to the ground.
For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life that honestly deserved an Academy Award.
At home, I played the sweet, oblivious, dutiful wife. I just let Julian patronize me, smiling while he bragged endlessly about his own genius. I even helped him pick out the custom tuxedo he was going to wear to the gala. I adjusted his lapels and offered all the right supportive words. He was completely blind to the trap being set right under his nose. But behind the scenes, I was a ghost moving through the financial underworld.
I introduced Marcus to Vivian, the ruthless head of my legal team.
We met in secret, working late into the night in a secure conference room. Vivian was an absolute shark, specializing in unweaving complex corporate webs. The three of us weren't just planning a simple divorce. We were meticulously planning a hostile corporate takeover. We quietly restructured the Vanguard Trust to remove any layers of anonymity. I was preparing to expose my own name as the sole investor behind his entire empire. We made sure every single document was bulletproof. We legally invoked a dormant clause in the original funding contract. It was a clause Julian had arrogantly ignored for years. It allowed Vanguard to immediately call in all outstanding loans if the board acted in bad faith. It was the ultimate kill switch. Say in a natural American voice, focused and sharp. We gathered irrefutable evidence of Julian's offshore embezzlement, tracking every stolen dollar. We built an airtight, legally bulletproof cage around him. And the best part was, he didn't feel a single bar being lowered into place. The tension in our penthouse grew suffocating as the gala approached. Julian's arrogance reached a fever pitch, making him completely unbearable. He treated the staff like peasants and constantly yelled at his assistants over the phone. The day before the gala, I walked into our bedroom and stopped in the doorway. I caught Julian standing in front of the full-length mirror, completely absorbed in his own reflection. He was rehearsing for his big moment. He was practicing his acceptance speech, striking a dominant pose and adjusting his cuffs. He rehearsed lines about how greatness isn't inherited, but forged by his own 2 hands. I just stood there watching him, knowing it was all about to end. The night of the gala finally arrived. The venue was a spectacular historical museum, transformed into a modern paradise. Paparazzi flashed their cameras as we stepped out of our car. Julian immediately began waving to the crowd, soaking in the adoration. Sylvia was walking right behind us, wearing a silk gown and dripping in jewels. She looked absolutely smug as she posed for the photographers. She was completely oblivious to the fact that my trust fund had paid for every diamond on her neck. It was a parade of borrowed wealth. Inside, we were seated at the head table, right in front of the massive stage. The room was packed with the most powerful people in the country. They were all gathered to celebrate my husband's supposed genius. For 2 hours, there was dinner, champagne, and endless networking. Then the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. The master of ceremonies took the stage. He gave a glowing, exaggerated introduction about the visionary genius of my husband. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Julian stood up, buttoned his jacket with a practiced flourish, and walked to the stage. The entire ballroom erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. He soaked in the applause. He walked with a confident, easy charm that had fooled the entire world. He took the microphone from the stand and looked out at the sea of wealthy, influential faces. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who truly believed he had conquered the world. He thought he was completely untouchable. For the next 10 minutes, Julian delivered his masterpiece of a lie. He talked about his poverty, the leaky apartment, and the countless rejections.
He painted himself as the ultimate underdog. He claimed he fought his way to the top through sheer willpower. And then he delivered the line he had practiced in the mirror. His voice echoed through the massive ballroom. He declared that he didn't have a safety net or anonymous benefactors. He proudly proclaimed that he built his empire with his own 2 hands. The crowd erupted into wild applause, completely buying into his fabricated myth. Say in a natural American voice, Julian bowed his head in mock humility. He played the part of the gracious victor perfectly. He was at the absolute peak of his power, completely unaware of the trap waiting for him. I stood up from my chair at the front table. The applause began to die down as people noticed me walking toward the stage. Julian looked confused for a fraction of a second, but then he smiled warmly, assuming I was coming up for a supportive embrace. I walked right up to the podium. I didn't go in for a hug. Instead, I just calmly reached out and took the microphone right out of his hand. He gripped it tight for a second, his eyes flashing the silent warning. But he couldn't exactly cause a scene in front of 300 cameras. So he let it go. I turned to face the crowd. The entire room went dead silent. Seriously, you could hear a pin drop. I told them my husband had just delivered a truly moving speech. His story of overcoming poverty and building an empire from dirt was incredibly inspiring. The only problem was, it was a complete fabrication. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Say in a natural American voice. Even heard a wine glass shatter at a nearby table. Julian's face went completely pale. He stepped toward me, hissing in a frantic whisper to get off the stage. I ignored him and looked directly into the live broadcast camera. Say in a natural American voice, exposing the truth. I told the world that Julian's first startup was actually dead in the water. Say in a natural American voice, he was hours away from bankruptcy until a mysterious firm called Vanguard Horizon injected $2 million to save him. Julian completely froze. His eyes widened in absolute terror. He had never spoken the name Vanguard Horizon in public. It was his most fiercely guarded corporate secret. I kept going, my voice steady. I explained how he assumed Vanguard Horizon was just a faceless group of bankers he could outsmart. Just like he assumed he could push out the brilliant engineer who actually built his technology. I told the crowd that Vanguard Horizon was not a group of bankers. Then I gestured to the side of the stage. I invited Marcus, the true architect of the company, to come out. The crowd started murmuring in shock as Marcus walked out from the shadows. He was wearing a sharp, dark suit, looking more confident than I'd ever seen him. He didn't even look at Julian. He just walked straight up and handed me a small remote control. I pressed the button on the remote. I told the crowd that Vanguard Horizon was a blind trust. A trust created by my grandfather and controlled entirely by me. Behind us, the massive screens flickered. Say, Julian's glowing company logo completely vanished. In its place, the original Vanguard Horizon funding contracts appeared in massive letters. Right at the bottom, next to the $2 million transfer, was my signature. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Reporters started shouting, and camera flashes completely blinded the stage. I turned to look at Julian. He looked like he had just been physically struck. His mouth was hanging open, but no words came out as he struggled to breathe. His brain was completely short-circuiting. He finally realized his clueless wife owned him. I told the room that I was his safety net, my voice booming through the speakers. I announced that I was the anonymous benefactor. I owned 60% and Marcus owned 10%. Say in a natural authority. Together, we held an unbreakable 70% supermajority. I turned back to the shocked audience. I declared that the board had just voted to terminate Julian as CEO. We cited extreme financial misconduct and offshore embezzlement. The screens changed again, exposing his hidden Cayman Island accounts. We even showed the emails to his divorce lawyer, proving his intent to defraud me. Overwhelmed by the noise, the gasps in the room turned into straight-up shouting. I looked down at the front table at Sylvia. She was clutching her chest, her face purple with humiliation. She finally realized I owned the very diamond necklace she was wearing. Julian finally found his voice and started screaming that I was lying. His polished facade completely shattered into a million pieces. He looked totally deranged, pointing a shaking finger at me and yelling it was a setup. But nobody was clapping for him anymore. The investors in the room were already pulling out their phones, frantically calling their brokers. The reporters were snapping photos of the documents on the screen. The myth of the self-made billionaire was dead. I stepped away from the podium and walked right up to him. He was shaking, completely out of his mind with panic. I looked him dead in the eye and lowered the microphone so only he could hear me. I told him he didn't build anything. I said, "You just drove the car I bought you." And now I'm taking the keys back. I didn't even wait for his response. I handed the microphone over to Marcus. Then I turned my back on my husband for the last time. I walked off that stage, leaving him standing there in the ruins of his own lies. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom with my head held high. The camera flashes lit my path the whole way out. I didn't look back once. I just walked out into the cool night air and climbed into my waiting car. The fallout the next morning was absolutely biblical. Julian became the laughingstock of the entire financial world. The board officially fired him by noon. And because I caught him hiding assets, my lawyer absolutely decimated him in the divorce. He was left with absolutely nothing. No company, no penthouse, no cars. He had to move into a tiny rented apartment with his bitter mother. I heard they just sit around all day, blaming everyone else for their downfall. As for me, I had no interest in running a tech company. I appointed Marcus as the new CEO. He hired back the original team and built a genuinely innovative workplace. Under his leadership, the company's stock doubled in just a year. I kept the penthouse, but I completely redecorated it. I got rid of all that cold, flashy modern art Julian bought to impress people. I replaced it with warm furniture, lots of books, and plants. I went back to living a quiet life.
But it was a different kind of quiet now.
It was the peaceful silence of a woman who knows exactly how powerful she is. I realized that karma isn't just some cosmic force. Sometimes karma requires a paper trail and a flawlessly timed microphone drop. If you're dealing with an arrogant partner or a toxic family, or someone trying to rewrite your reality, here are 3 lessons from Karma's diary. Lesson 1. Silence is not weakness. It's a strategy. Narcissists rely on volume. They boast, they yell, and they constantly try to control the narrative. Because deep down, they're incredibly insecure. When you stay silent, they mistake it for submission. They just assume you aren't paying attention. But silence allows you to observe.
Say in a natural American voice, low and strategic, to gather your evidence and plan your next move in the dark.
Say in a natural American voice, firm and warning. Never interrupt a toxic person while they're making a mistake.
Let them build their house of cards.
And keep your hands steady until it's time to pull the bottom card. Say in a natural American voice, strong and clear. Lesson 2. Never let a narcissist rewrite your history. People with massive egos will constantly try to erase your contributions. They'll convince themselves that they did it all alone, and they'll try to convince you of it too. They will gaslight you into believing you were just a passenger on their journey. Don't fall for it. Keep your receipts. And always know your exact worth.
Do not let anyone diminish the sacrifices you made.
Or the ideas you provided. Or the support you gave.
The truth is absolute.
No matter how loudly they try to shout over it. Say in a natural American voice, clear and authoritative. Lesson 3. True power doesn't need to shout. Say in a natural American voice, the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. Julian needed magazine covers and custom suits to feel powerful.
Because his power depended entirely on what other people thought of him.
Real power is knowing you hold the keys.
Even if they're hidden right in your pocket.
Real power is financial independence and emotional regulation. It's the ability to walk away with your dignity completely intact. You don't need to scream to win. You just need to be smarter. Thank you for opening these pages with me today. It's been quite a journey. Remember, your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. Stay strong and keep your boundaries firm. Always let karma do its work. Until next time, the diary is closed. Say in a natural, warm, and reflective voice. Vanguard Horizon isn't just a shadow company anymore. It's become a real foundation for people who actually want to build something meaningful.
We shifted the focus away from ego and put it back on genuine progress.
As for the ones who thought they could build an empire on lies, well, reality has a funny way of catching up to you. The illusion fades, and all that's left is a cautionary tale. I don't need the spotlight, and honestly, I never did. I have my peace, my quiet, and the knowledge that I protected what mattered. The space finally feels like home. Some stories are written in ink. Others are written in the actions we take when absolutely no one is watching. The truth always finds its way to the surface. You are the author of your own life. Don't ever let someone else hold the pen. Make sure it's a story worth telling.